The world's top neurologists said he was gone. A ruthless syndicate boss, trapped in a vegetative state for 2 years. They spent millions, brought in specialists from Zurich to Johns Hopkins. Nothing. Then a spilled tray of coffee and a desperate accidental kiss from a diner waitress changed everything. Lorenzo Romano was not a man who slept. As the undisputed head of the Romano crime syndicate, he controlled the eastern seaboard's most lucrative shipping ports, from the docks of New Jersey down to the private harbors of Miami. He was a phantom, a tactician, and a predator, until the night of November 12th, exactly 2 years ago. It happened during a highly exclusive, private gala at the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan. Lorenzo was sipping a glass of Macallan 1926. Within 3 minutes, his vision blurred. Within 5, he collapsed. The media reported it as a massive, sudden brain hemorrhage. But the underworld knew the truth. Lorenzo had been poisoned. It was a synthetic, untraceable neurotoxin designed not to kill him, but to lock him inside his own mind forever. His family spared no expense. They moved him to a heavily fortified, off-the-books medical compound nestled deep in the Catskill Mountains, known only as the Sanctuary. It was a fortress disguised as a billionaire's retreat, equipped with medical technology that wouldn't be available to the public for another decade. The Romano family brought in everyone. Over the course of 2 brutal years, Lorenzo's file was passed around the globe. Neurologists from the Mayo Clinic, experimental brain mapping pioneers from Switzerland, underground rogue surgeons who dealt in black market stem cell therapies. The running joke in the dark web's medical forums was that 99,999 doctors had tried and failed to wake the Coma King. Dr. Arthur Penhaligon, a former chief of neurology at Cedars-Sinai, whose license had been quietly bought by the Romanos, oversaw the daily operations. They tried deep brain stimulation, transcranial magnetic pulses, and experimental neuropeptides. Nothing. Lorenzo remained a marble statue, breathing on a ventilator, his Glasgow coma scale hovering at a desolate 3. His empire was slowly fracturing. His younger brother, Dante Romano, had stepped in as acting boss, but the sharks were circling. The Russian syndicates were pushing into their territory, and the family was bleeding cash. 50 miles south, in a cramped, drafty apartment in Yonkers, Mia Sutton was fighting a very different kind of war. Mia was 24, exhausted, and drowning in medical debt. Her younger brother had cystic fibrosis, and the insurance company had just denied his latest round of treatments. To keep the collection agencies at bay, Mia worked 3 jobs. By day, she slung coffee at a rundown diner. By night, she worked for Elite Palette, a high-end catering company that serviced private estates and corporate retreats in upstate New York. Mia didn't care about the rumors surrounding Elite Palette's clients. She didn't care that the drivers were heavily armed or that the delivery vans had bulletproof glass. All she cared about was the hazard pay. It was a blistering cold Tuesday night when the call came in. A massive snowstorm had grounded most of the catering staff, but a VIP client in the Catskills needed a midnight service for a team of 20 exhausted researchers. The dispatcher offered triple overtime and a $2,000 cash tip to anyone willing to brave the icy mountain roads. Mia didn't hesitate. She grabbed her heavy coat, loaded the insulated trays of prime rib, roasted vegetables, and artisan coffees into the back of the reinforced van, and drove into the blizzard. When she arrived at the sanctuary, the level of security was terrifying. Men in tactical gear checked the undercarriage of the van with mirrors. A German shepherd sniffed the food trays. Mia's ID was scanned. Her phone was confiscated, and she was handed a temporary visitor badge that restricted her to the kitchen and the staff break room. Drop the food in this East Wing lounge. Do not wander. Do not speak to the residents. You have 20 minutes, then you leave. A massive guard with a scarred jaw growled, pointing down a sterile, fiercely illuminated hallway that smelled of bleach and expensive cologne. Mia nodded, her hands trembling as she pushed the heavy metal catering cart. The wheels squeaked agonizingly against the polished marble floors. The estate was eerily silent, save for the faint, rhythmic beeping of medical equipment echoing from unseen rooms. She found the staff lounge, set up the buffet with practiced efficiency, and prepared to leave. But as she turned the cart around, the wheel caught on a heavy medical cable taped to the floor, snapping the cart's front axle. The cart listed violently. Trying to catch a cascading stack of ceramic coffee cups, Mia lost her footing and slammed into a heavy oak door. The door didn't just rattle, it swung open. Mia tumbled into the darkness of the room, the cups shattering against the floor. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had strictly been told not to wander. She scrambled to her feet, ready to bolt, but the sight before her stole the breath from her lungs. The room was massive, bathed in the eerie blue glow of a dozen complex medical monitors. In the center of the room, on an elevated, state-of-the-art hospital bed, lay Lorenzo Romano. Mia didn't know who he was. She saw a man who looked like a fallen Roman gladiator. His dark hair was meticulously swept back, his jaw covered in a dark, neat stubble. Despite the tubes feeding into his veins and the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator pushing air into his lungs, he possessed a terrifying, dormant power. Before Mia could retreat, she heard heavy footsteps approaching from the adjoining private bathroom. Panic seized her. If the guards caught her in here, breaking expensive china in a restricted VIP medical suite, she wouldn't just lose her job. She might lose her life. Acting on pure survival instinct, Mia dove behind the heavy velvet drapes drawn across the room's massive bay windows. Holding her breath, a man walked into the room. It was Dante Romano. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored Brioni suit, swirling a glass of amber liquid. He walked up to the side of his brother's bed and stared down at Lorenzo. Mia peeked through a tiny gap in the fabric, her blood running cold. 2 years, Enzo, Dante whispered, his voice a chilling mixture of affection and venom. 2 years of this theater. The doctors say your brain is a wasteland, but I like to think you're still in there, somewhere. I like to think you can hear me. Dante took a slow sip of his drink. I'm finalizing the deal with the Volkov Bratva tomorrow. I'm giving them the Brooklyn docks. The capos are furious, of course. They think you are going to wake up and save them. They think I'm weak. But they don't know it was me, Enzo. They don't know I paid the bartender at the Pierre to slip that beautiful little neurotoxin into your glass. Behind the curtain, Mia slapped a hand over her own mouth to stifle a gasp. Tears of pure terror pricked her eyes. She had just walked into a Mafia confession. She was a witness to the assassination of a kingpin. It's over, brother, Dante sneered, leaning in close to Lorenzo's ear. Dr. Penhaligon is going to recommend pulling the plug next week. The family will mourn. I will weep at your funeral. And then everything you built will be mine. Dante checked his gold Rolex, finished his drink, and turned away. Rest in peace, boss. The heavy door clicked shut as Dante left the suite. For a full minute, Mia couldn't move. Her limbs were locked in a paralysis of fear. When she finally stumbled out from behind the curtain, she was shaking violently. She had to get out. She had to run to the van, drive back to the city, and pretend she never heard a single word. But as she crept toward the door, she looked back at the man on the bed. Lorenzo. A profound wave of pity washed over her. He was surrounded by millions of dollars of equipment, guarded by an army, yet he was utterly alone, betrayed by his own flesh and blood. Without thinking, Mia stepped closer to the bed. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely a breath over the mechanical hiss of the ventilator. "They're going to kill you." She leaned over him to straighten a tangled IV line that Dante had carelessly bumped. As she did, the sole of her cheap, worn-out sneaker slipped on the slick surface of the spilled coffee from her earlier fall. Her legs gave out. Mia pitched forward. In a desperate attempt to not crush his chest or rip out his breathing tube, she twisted her body, throwing her hands out to catch the metal guardrails of the bed. But she miscalculated the distance. She collapsed right across his torso. Her face crashed downward, and her lips collided violently with his. It wasn't a romantic, gentle kiss. It was a chaotic, forceful collision of teeth and soft tissue. A desperate, heavy impact driven by gravity and panic. For a fraction of a second, her soft, warm lips were crushed against his cold, motionless mouth. Mia gasped against him, her lungs exhaling a sharp breath of warm air directly over his skin. The scent of her, vanilla, cheap diner coffee, and the sharp ozone of the winter snowstorm washed over him. And then, a sound pierced the silence. Beep, 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 beep. The massive heart monitor mounted on the wall suddenly spiked. The steady, hypnotic rhythm of a resting, comatose heart shattered into a frantic, jagged mountain range of electrical activity. Mia scrambled backward off the bed, wiping her mouth in shock. "Oh my God! Oh my God! I broke him!" she panicked, staring at the flashing red lights. But the machine wasn't breaking. It was responding. For 2 years, the synthetic neurotoxin had kept Lorenzo's synapses locked in a dark, impenetrable vault. No electricity, no pain, no stimulation had been able to breach the wall. But the human brain is a chaotic, unpredictable engine. The sudden, violent physical trauma to his face, combined with the sharp, overwhelming sensory overload of an unfamiliar scent, the heat of her breath, and the sudden crush of her weight against his chest, acted like a defibrillator to his dormant nervous system. It was a 1 in a billion neurological misfire, a short circuit that bypassed the toxin's blockade. Lorenzo's fingers twitched. Mia backed toward the door, her eyes wide with terror as the alarms in the hallway began to blare. The medical team was coming. The guards were coming. Dante was probably coming. "I have to go," her brain screamed. She grabbed the door handle, but a sudden, violent sound stopped her dead in her tracks. The ventilator hissed, but Lorenzo was coughing, fighting the tube. Mia turned around. Lorenzo Romano's eyes were open. They were not the vacant, cloudy eyes of a brain-dead patient. They were sharp, furious, and burning with a terrifying, predatory intelligence. He was choking on the plastic tube down his throat, his chest heaving as his body fought a 2-year war of atrophy in a matter of seconds. The heavy oak door burst open. Dr. Penhaligon rushed in, followed by 2 massive armed guards. Dante Romano was right behind them, his face draining of all color as he stared at the bed. "What the hell did you do?" the head guard roared, unholstering his weapon and aiming it directly at Mia's chest. "On the ground, now!" Mia dropped to her knees, sobbing, her hands raised in the air. "I didn't do anything. I slipped. I'm just the catering girl." Dr. Penhaligon rushed to the bed, shouting for sedatives. "His pressure is redlining. Hold him down. He's going to tear his lines out." But Lorenzo wasn't looking at the doctor, and he wasn't looking at the brother who had betrayed him. With a surge of violent, impossible strength that tore the IVs from his arms and splattered blood across the pristine white sheets, Lorenzo ripped the breathing tube from his own throat. He gasped for air, his muscles trembling violently as he fought gravity. He turned his head, his dark, lethal gaze locking onto the terrified girl kneeling on the floor. "Let her go," Lorenzo rasped, his voice sounding like grinding gravel. The room froze. The guards lowered their weapons, stunned into absolute submission by the voice of the ghost they thought was dead. Lorenzo's eyes cut to Dante, who looked like he was about to vomit. The Coma King remembered everything. He had heard every word Dante had spoken while trapped in the darkness. But right now, only one thing mattered. Lorenzo looked back at Mia, his chest heaving, his eyes burning into hers. "Bring her here," Lorenzo commanded, the lethal authority of the syndicate boss echoing through the room. "No one touches her." The silence in the VIP medical suite was absolute, broken only by the frantic, erratic beeping of the disconnected monitors and the ragged, wet sound of Lorenzo Romano pulling oxygen into his atrophied lungs. Every man in the room was frozen, caught in the gravitational pull of a ghost who had violently ripped his way back into the world of the living. Mia remained on her knees, the crushed porcelain of the coffee cups biting into her shins. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Lorenzo's eyes, dark, calculating, and burning with a feverish intensity, never left her. Despite the tubes hanging from his neck, despite the pale, gaunt hollows of his cheeks, he possessed an aura of absolute, terrifying command. "I said," Lorenzo repeated, his voice gaining a fraction of its former gravelly resonance. "Bring her here." The scarred guard who had escorted Mia earlier, a veteran enforcer named Matteo, slowly holstered his weapon. He looked at Dante Romano, then back at the man on the bed. The hierarchy of the underworld was written in blood, and blood recognized its true master. Matteo stepped forward, gently gripping Mia's arm, and pulled her to her feet, guiding her toward the edge of the mattress. Dante finally snapped out of his paralyzed stupor, his handsome, aristocratic face contorted into a mask of desperate, artificial joy. "Enzo! My God, Enzo, it's a miracle!" Dante stepped forward, throwing his arms wide. "We thought we lost you. For 2 years, I've prayed." "Shut your mouth," Lorenzo whispered. The words were quiet, but they struck like a physical blow. Dante stopped dead, his arms slowly lowering. "Brother, you're confused. The trauma, the drugs." "I heard you, Dante," Lorenzo wheezed, a bitter, blood-stained smile curling the corner of his lips. "I heard everything. For 2 years, every visit, every pathetic grievance, every deal you botched." Lorenzo shifted his weight, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the metal bed rail to keep himself upright. "I was in the dark, Dante. But I wasn't deaf. I heard you tell Dr. Penhaligon to reduce my nutrient drip. I heard you brag about the Pierre Hotel." Dr. Penhaligon, standing by the door, physically recoiled, his face draining of blood. He took a slow, silent step backward toward the hallway. "Matteo," Lorenzo croaked, not taking his eyes off his brother. "Lock the door." Matteo didn't hesitate. He slammed the heavy oak door shut and turned the deadbolt, sliding his hand back to the grip of his sidearm. The allegiance of the room had shifted in a matter of seconds. Dante's facade crumbled, replaced by the cornered, feral panic of a dead man walking. "He's delirious!" Dante shouted to the other 2 guards in the room, men he had personally hired from a private military contracting firm in Virginia. "The neurotoxin rotted his brain. He's a threat to the syndicate. Put him down! I am the acting boss. I order you to put him down!" The two mercenaries raised their suppressed weapons, aiming directly at the hospital bed. Mia screamed, instinctively throwing her arms up to cover her head. But before the mercenaries could pull their triggers, Lorenzo's hand shot out with blinding, desperate speed. He grabbed the heavy, stainless steel IV pole standing next to the bed and swung it like a bat. The heavy base smashed into the side of the nearest mercenary's knee, shattering the joint with a sickening crunch. The man howled, his shot going wild and shattering the bay window. Simultaneously, Matteo drew his weapon and fired 2 deafening rounds. The second mercenary dropped to the floor, a blooming red stain spreading across his tactical vest. Dante lunged for the fallen mercenary's weapon, but Matteo was faster. He kicked the gun across the floor and pressed the steaming barrel of his pistol directly against Dante's forehead. "Don't move, Capo," Matteo growled, his voice dripping with disgust. The brief, violent explosion of chaos ended as quickly as it had begun. The smell of cordite and copper filled the sterile, bleach-scented air. Mia was trembling so violently her teeth chattered. She crouched on the floor beside the bed, her hands over her ears, trapped in a nightmare of gunfire and betrayal. Lorenzo fell back against the pillows, exhausted, his chest heaving as he fought off the darkness creeping into the edges of his vision. He had spent all his stored adrenaline in those 10 seconds. He looked down at the terrified waitress trembling beside his bed. "You," Lorenzo commanded softly. "Look at me." Mia slowly lowered her hands, tears streaming down her pale face. She looked up into the eyes of the Mafia lord. "What is your name?" he asked. Mia, she stuttered. "Mia Sutton. I swear I didn't mean to. I just slipped." "You slipped," Lorenzo repeated, a faint, genuine amusement flickering in his dark eyes. He reached down, his trembling, calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her tear-streaked cheek. The contrast between the violent, ruthless kingpin and the gentle, almost reverent touch sent a shockwave through her system. "You slipped and shattered a 2-year chemical cage, Mia Sutton." He looked up at Matteo. "Bind Dante, put him in the cellar, and get Penhaligon. If the doctor tries to run, shoot him in the legs." "And the girl, boss?" Matteo asked, nodding toward Mia. "She heard everything. She saw the hit." Lorenzo's gaze returned to Mia. He saw her cheap, worn-out shoes, the dark circles of exhaustion under her eyes, and the sheer, raw terror of a civilian caught in a war zone. Yet she hadn't run when Dante walked in. She had stopped. She had pitied him. "She saved my life," Lorenzo said, his voice hardening into absolute authority. "She belongs to me now. Prepare my transport. We are leaving the sanctuary." 3 weeks later, the underworld was unrecognizable. The news of Lorenzo Romano's resurrection swept through the criminal syndicates like a wildfire. The Russian Volkov Bratva, expecting an easy handover of the Brooklyn docks, instead found their warehouses raided and their lieutenants shipped back to Moscow in pine boxes. Dante Romano had vanished without a trace, a ghost story whispered among the capos to remind them of the price of treason. Lorenzo's recovery defied every law of modern medicine. Fueled by a sheer, terrifying force of will and an intensive physical therapy regimen at his private, heavily fortified estate on Fisher Island, he reclaimed his empire with a ruthlessness that made his previous reign look merciful. But within the high-security walls of the Fisher Island compound, there was one anomaly: a 24-year-old diner waitress. Mia had not been allowed to return to her cramped Yonkers apartment. On the night of the shootout at the sanctuary, Lorenzo had her swept into his armored convoy. At first she thought she was a prisoner, a liability being kept under lock and key to ensure her silence. She was given a sprawling, ocean-facing suite in the east wing of the mansion. Her closet was filled with designer clothes she had never asked for. Gourmet chefs prepared her meals, but the gilded cage felt suffocating until the second week, when Lorenzo summoned her to his private study. He was seated behind a massive mahogany desk, reviewing shipping manifests. He looked different now. The gaunt, hollowed-out coma patient was gone. In his place sat a predator in a tailored Tom Ford suit, radiating power and quiet danger. "Sit, Mia," he instructed, gesturing to the leather chair opposite him. She sat, nervously wringing her hands in her lap. "Am I allowed to go home now? I won't tell the police anything. I swear." Lorenzo closed his folder and looked at her. "Your apartment in Yonkers has been vacated. The lease is terminated." Panic seized her throat. "What? No, all my brother's things are there. His medical supplies. Your brother Thomas was airlifted to the Cystic Fibrosis Center at Johns Hopkins 3 days ago," Lorenzo interrupted smoothly. "He is under the care of Dr. Harrison, the leading specialist in the country. His experimental gene modulation treatments have been fully funded. For life." Mia froze. The air left her lungs. For years she had fought tooth and nail, drowning in debt, begging insurance adjusters, just to keep Tommy breathing. You paid for Johns Hopkins?" "I bought the entire respiratory wing," Lorenzo corrected, pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water and pushing one toward her. "Consider it the first installment of my debt to you." Mia stared at him, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of relief and confusion. "I don't understand." "Why?" "I just tripped." Lorenzo stood up, slowly walking around the desk. He moved with a slight stiffness, the only remaining sign of his 2-year paralysis. He stopped in front of her chair, looking down at her with an intensity that made her skin heat up. "You did more than trip, Mia. Penhaligon's neurotoxin was a masterpiece of chemical engineering. It hijacked the sensory processes in the brain. They tried electricity, drugs, pain. None of it registered." Lorenzo leaned down, placing his hands on the armrests of her chair, trapping her in his space. He smelled of rich espresso and expensive cologne. It required a catastrophic sensory overload to break the circuit. The exact combination of kinetic impact, adrenaline, and... He paused, his gaze dropping momentarily to her lips. "A specific biochemical reaction." Mia swallowed hard, her heart doing a frantic stutter step. "An accidental kiss?" "I don't believe in accidents," Lorenzo murmured, his face inches from hers. "In my world, survival is calculated. But you were an unpredictable variable, an act of chaos that handed me back my throne." He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. The touch was electric, igniting a dangerous spark in the quiet room. "You don't have to stay here," Lorenzo said softly. "You have a new identity waiting, a house in Aspen, and enough money to ensure you and Thomas never work another day in your lives. You can walk out those doors right now, and my men will safely escort you." Mia looked into his dark, fathomless eyes. She thought of the cold diner, the endless, grinding poverty, the fear. But looking at Lorenzo, she realized the fear she felt now was completely different. It wasn't the fear of a victim. It was the thrilling, terrifying freefall of a woman standing on the edge of a precipice. She had seen the monster he was. She had seen him order men to die. Yet in his eyes she saw an unwavering, iron-clad devotion reserved solely for her. "And if I don't want to go to Aspen?" she whispered, her voice trembling, but her gaze holding his. A slow, devastating smile spread across the Mafia lord's face. The syndicate king had reclaimed his empire, but he had just found his queen. "Then you stay," Lorenzo breathed, closing the distance between them. "And you rule it all with me." Did you love this thrilling Mafia romance, filled with heart-stopping twists, unexpected miracles, and dangerous devotion? From a billionaire's frozen slumber to a fateful, life-changing accident, Lorenzo and Mia's story proves that sometimes chaos brings the ultimate reward. If you want more intense, high-stakes drama and gripping romance stories brought to life, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for daily storytelling that will keep you on the edge of your seat.